You ever stop and think about how a really good idea spreads, you know, within a group?
Hmm.
Not just like person by person, but almost like a groundswell? What makes some messages really take hold across a whole community?
It's a fundamental question, yeah. And it's actually exactly what we're unpacking today. You've brought some fascinating insights from Donald McGavran,
That's right.
a really influential figure in the study of, well, missionary work and how ideas spread in that context.
Absolutely. Donald McGavran. He had this deep personal connection to it all. Grew up in India, son of missionaries, was a missionary himself there.
Right, even translated religious texts.
Yeah. And later he founded the School of World Mission at Fuller Seminary. His real focus was trying to understand the dynamics of church growth, especially, when introducing faith into completely new cultural settings.
And the material you shared, it's from his book, A Church in Every People, which is really a foundational text for thinking about church growth in these diverse contexts.
So, okay, our goal for this deep dive.
Mm.
Let's get to the heart of McGavran's main argument. He's looking at the most effective way, he thinks, to establish a Christian presence within different, what he calls, segments of mankind.
Segments of mankind, like different social groups.
Exactly. Think city dwellers, different economic levels, or even traditional structures like castes or tribes. And he basically contrasts two very different ways of going about this.
And what's really thought-provoking, I think, about McGavran is how he questions what was and maybe still is kind of the default method.
Yeah.
He calls it the conglomerate church approach. Maybe you can explain what that usually looks like.
Okay, yeah. So the conglomerate church idea
Yeah,
is probably what most people picture when they think about like early missionary work.
right.
It's the idea of going into a new place, sharing your beliefs, and winning converts, one by one, individual basis, without really focusing on their specific social group or cultural background.
Just whoever responds.
Exactly. The picture of a missionary arriving and, over time, different individuals from all sorts of backgrounds decide, okay, I'm in.
And McGavran points out how these first churches often got started, right? He mentions things like people who worked for the mission.
Yeah, or people who were rescued, maybe orphans.
He even talks about that history in some parts of Africa where missionaries would, buy enslaved people and free them, and they would become the core of a new church.
So you end up with a church that's a real mix. Different ages, different social classes, maybe even people from groups that traditionally didn't mix, all worshiping together.
A real mix.
McGavran himself calls it made up of members of several different segments of society, ethnically quite a different social unit. So it's diverse, yeah. A gathering of individuals.
And this is the key insight from McGavran, isn't it? While that sounds kind of straightforward,
Uh-huh.
he argues it's actually a surprisingly slow way to see widespread growth within a whole population. Why does he say that? What's the core reason?
Well, his main point really boils down to how these individual conversions are seen by the person's original community, their family, their friends, their tribe.
Yeah.
When someone steps out of their established social group to become a Christian like this, their community often sees it as a rejection, like they're breaking ties.
Leaving us to join them.
Exactly, leaving us to join them, maybe abandoning traditions, beliefs they've held forever.
And that can have pretty serious social consequences for the person, right? McGavran is quite blunt about the costs these individual converts might face.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about ostracism, facing disapproval, sometimes even, violence. He puts it starkly. Now, if anyone in becoming a Christian is forced out of or comes out of a tightly structured segment of society, the Christian cause wins the individual but loses the family.
Wow. Wins the individual, loses the family. That's quite a trade-off.
It is, and it makes you think.
And the impact goes beyond just that one person and their family, doesn't it? If one person is seen as being, well, misled, as McGavran quotes the community's view, it can build up this strong resistance within the whole group. Makes it much harder for anyone else from that same background to even consider it.
Yeah, exactly. The rest of the community gets wary, maybe even defensive. They think, the Christians misled one of our people, and then McGavran says, we're going to make quite sure that they do not mislead any more of us.
So it creates a barrier.
Definitely. And McGavran notes something interesting. This one-by-one method, while it seems obvious, might actually be the easier path for the missionaries themselves to start with.
Easier? How so?
Well, maybe easier to just preach generally and take whoever comes, rather than the deep, focused work needed for the alternative. But he suggests it's less effective for real widespread growth. He even says many church planters might only ever achieve this kind of diverse but ultimately limited congregation.
It's a counterintuitive idea, isn't it? That what feels like initial success could actually be kind of a long-term bottleneck. So, okay, what's the alternative? What does McGavran champion instead?
Okay, so this brings us to what he calls the people movement approach.
People movement.
Yeah. Instead of just focusing on individual converts scattered across different social groups, McGavran pushes for movements where whole communities could be tribes, clans, even like tightly knit social groups like a specific trade guild come to embrace Christianity together as a group.
And he's pretty strong about this. He says something like, the great advances of the church on new ground have always come by people movements, never by the one-by-one approach. That's a really bold claim.
It is bold.
Yeah.
And he lays out 7 key principles that he thinks are crucial for making these kinds of community-wide movements happen.
Okay, 7 principle. Let's unpack those. What's the first one?
First one, aim for a cluster of growing congregations within one people group. The goal isn't just one mixed church, it's multiple growing churches all within the same social segment.
Okay, that makes sense, especially thinking about the problems with the conglomerate model. By focusing on one group, you're kind of using the existing social network, the relationships that are already there.
Exactly. He gives this example of, say, focusing on taxi drivers in Taipei. The goal wouldn't be just one church with some taxi drivers, but aiming to start multiple churches made up mostly of taxi drivers and their families.
Tapping into those shared bonds, that shared life.
Right. And the second principle builds right on that. Concentrate your efforts. Focus your resources and energy on one specific people group at a time.
So instead of spreading yourself thin across lots of different groups, McGavran says, no, really invest deeply in understanding and working within one community. Like, he mentions the Nair people in India as an example. Direct your efforts towards seeing a big movement within that specific group.
And the third principle is really interesting. He says you should encourage new converts to remain integrated with their own people, in most parts of life anyway.
Okay, so it's not about demanding they completely ditch their culture.
No, entirely no.
This is a really subtle but important point. McGavran isn't saying, keep doing things that clearly conflict with Christian belief, like idolatry or whatever.
Right, obviously not sin.
But in things like food, clothing, general social customs, he actually encourages them to maintain those cultural ties.
He even brings up the tricky issue of marriage. In many groups, people traditionally marry within their own community, right?
Yeah.
Individual conversion totally disrupts that. Suddenly there's no one like them to marry within the new faith. But if a whole group moves, those existing social patterns can often continue. And he gives this potential message from a convert. I am a better son than I was before. I am still one of you. I am more one of you than I ever was before. The idea is showing positive change from within, not becoming totally alien.
Makes sense. Showing you're still part of the fabric, just improved in a way. What's principle 4?
Fourth is encouraging group decisions for Christ. Instead of only pushing for immediate individual baptisms, work towards families or larger social units deciding together.
Okay, and the thinking there is?
Well, it lessens the impact of that ostracism we talked about. If your whole family or a large chunk of your village decides together, the social pressure on any one person is way less. It's a community thing, not just you sticking your neck out alone.
Gotcha. Reduces the leaving us for them feeling. Principle 5.
Fifth principle. Keep the momentum going. Aim for a constant stream of new converts. McGavran warns against just focusing inward, only nurturing the people who've already converted and forgetting about outreach.
Right, the danger of becoming a closed-off little group.
Exactly. He knows people worry about new believers being raw, not deeply instructed yet.
Sure, that's a valid concern.
But he argues the bigger danger is sealing off the community.
Yeah.
Creating an exclusive club that can't connect with or influence the rest of their people anymore. He points to the New Testament, like Paul's letters, suggesting early churches got foundational teaching but kept growing through outreach.
So don't just consolidate, keep expanding within the group. Okay, number 6.
Principle 6 is helping the new converts become examples of the highest hopes of their own people. They should be seen as embodying the best ideals and aspirations of their community.
Like the advance guard, as he puts it.
Yeah, exactly. Showing that this new faith actually helps them be better members of their society. You get his examples. We are better sons, brothers and wives, better members of our labor union than we ever were before. demonstrating positive change within the existing framework.
Interesting. So it's not about rejecting the framework, but fulfilling its best potential through faith. And the last one, number 7.
The final principle deals with brotherhood and social structures. This one's complex.
Okay.
So while McGavran strongly emphasizes the spiritual unity of all believers in Christ, no Jew, Greek, slave, free, etc.
Right. The core Christian message of equality.
Yes. But he also acknowledges the reality of the existing social world with its hierarchies and structures. He points out that even the Apostle Paul, while preaching equality, didn't immediately try to tear down every social norm of his time, like slavery, for instance.
That's a potentially controversial point.
It is, and needs careful handling. But McGavran's argument seems to be that the most effective way to achieve real brotherhood and social justice long-term is through widespread conversion within each segment of society. Work for transformation from within those structures.
So rather than trying to dismantle the structure from the outside first.
Right. He argues, maybe even claims, indeed, the best way to get justice, possibly the only way to get justice, is to have very large numbers in every segment of society become committed Christians.
So get critical mass within each group, and that will eventually lead to broader societal change and justice. That's the idea.
That seems to be the core of it.
Okay, so we have these two approaches, the one-by-one conglomerate church and the people movement approach with its 7 principles. It's important to say McGavran isn't totally throwing out the first method, is he?
No, not completely. He definitely recognizes it has value. Sometimes it's the only way things can start. Maybe it's the spark. But his fundamental conviction, based on his study of history, is that the really big advances, the major periods of church growth in new places, have almost always been driven by these people movements.
And he uses that image, right? The desert plain versus the verdant mountains.
Yes, that's such a great simile. The one-by-one approach often feels like trying to make things grow on a dry, difficult desert plain.
Yeah.
Slow, hard work.
Painstaking.
Yeah. But the people movement approach, when it catches fire, is like finding fertile ground up in the mountains. Suddenly, widespread, rapid growth becomes much more possible.
So if we're boiling this down for the listener, what's the absolute key takeaway from McGavran's thinking here?
I think, the central insight is probably this. Focusing your efforts on fostering conversions within specific existing social groups while respecting their culture as much as you can without compromising core beliefs. That approach can lead to much more significant, more sustainable growth than just relying on individual conversions that pull people out of their communities.
And thinking about our listeners, many interested in effective strategies, learning how change happens. How might this principle apply outside of just, religious missions?
That's a great question. I mean, think about any situation where you're trying to spread an idea or build a movement or create some kind of meaningful change in a community or even an organization.
Right.
Does McGavran's idea suggest that maybe focusing on specific subgroups, understanding their internal dynamics, their existing relationships, could that be a more powerful strategy than just a broad, scattered approach? It makes you think about group dynamics differently.
It really does. Which leads to maybe a final provocative thought for everyone listening to mull over.
Okay.
If focusing intentionally on specific communities can be such a powerful catalyst for change, as McGavran suggests, what does that imply for how we should approach understanding and engaging with all kinds of diverse groups? In pretty much any context. How do we find that balance between recognizing individual journeys, individual choices, and harnessing the undeniable power of collective movements?
Yeah, the individual versus the group and how change really happens. Definitely something worth reflecting on.